Welcome, everyone, to Life Beyond 6 Feet. I'm Damien from RKB Paranormal, and this week I have Chris and Anson from Anubis Paranormal Research Organization. Chris and Anson, welcome to Life Beyond 6 Feet.
Nice to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting us.
Absolutely. I think you guys actually reached out to me, which is really exciting because I don't have very many reach out. I have to contact everybody that's on my show, so it's always exciting when somebody reaches out to me. So tell me a little bit about Anubis Paranormal Research. What is Anubis?
Well, it kind of began with me several years back. I had always been involved with paranormal ever since I was a very small child. And I actually, through the years, went to UCLA when they had their paranormal department out there.
Right.
And I was instructed by Barry Taft and also Elizabeth Moss and so forth. They were primarily responsible for the entity case.
Okay.
And it was a very, very interesting program because one of the things that they did was they taught us everything about everything else besides the paranormal. So we studied geology, we studied physics, we studied hydroelectric sources. And it originally, when I went into the classroom at the beginning, we had an extremely full, large class. It was one of those big auditorium type classes.
Right.
And the instructor came out, Barry Taft came out and said, by the end of this program, there's only going to be a handful of you, because everybody that got into it thought it was going to be nothing but ghost stories and ghost movies and and it was far from it. It actually was the hardest course I took when I was in college.
Oh, wow.
But I was one of 14 that actually got through the whole course. After that, I had started with other groups out in Southern California. And then I returned back to Colorado with my son. And he and I started Anubis Paranormal Research Organization. And Anubis, like I had said earlier, is the guardian of the underworld and guardian of the dead in the Egyptian mythology. It's also my zodiac sign, Leo.
Okay. Right.
So
hey,
the Egyptians,
mine too.
Okay, so under the Egyptian, you would have followed under Anubis.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the connection. And then, of course, the moon represented my son because he was a Cancer, and their sign is a moon. So it was kind of a mixture of the both.
Right.
And at that time, also, I was a park ranger. So I was being stationed pretty much all over the United States. And at each location I was assigned, we would open up a new chapter. So we have chapters in California. We have chapters here in Colorado, actually 2 chapters. We have a chapter in Texas, one in Florida, one in Nebraska. We have a new one in New York. We have also a new one in Scotland, Aberdeenshire, Scotland.
Oh, wow.
And also a new chapter in Nagasaki, Japan.
Oh, man. So y'all are pretty big then. That's awesome.
Exactly. So that's how we more or less got started.
Right. Now, I don't think I asked before we started recording now is how are you two related? Is that your son, or are y'all just like longtime friends? Who is Anson to you?
He is a very good friend of mine.
Okay.
And Anson came into the picture when we were actually starting our Colorado chapter here.
Oh, wow.
And he has really proven his worth. Of course, he's a demonologist as well, so that helps us. And he has now been promoted to the assistant executive director position, because with all of these new chapters starting across the United States as well as the world, I need a little help. But originally he was our state director.
Right.
And now his wife is our state director for Colorado.
Oh, wow. All right, so a demonologist, that's going to lead me into a couple other questions here in a little bit. So that's I think you're the first demonologist I've had on the show, so that's pretty interesting. So before you took this class at UCLA, Chris, did you
Mhm.
ever actively investigate, or is it just something you were kind of intrigued by, and then you seen this class and say, "I want to take this class"?
No, I've always been interested in it. When I was about 7 years old, I lived here in Colorado with my folks, and I one evening was laying in bed. It was probably about 2 or 3 in the morning, and I saw whom I thought was my father standing in the doorway. And but it was all the individual was all black, but I didn't know any difference. And I started talking to this figure, and it didn't respond. And finally, the next morning, I asked my father, I says, "Why were you standing in my doorway?" And he says, "I wasn't standing in your doorway." And he says, "But Daddy, I saw you standing in my doorway last night, and you didn't answer when I was talking to you." And he says, "You were dreaming." So I, being a kid, okay, well, whatever. So a couple nights later, the individual returned with another black figure and stood in my doorway again. And so I knew it wasn't my father, but I wasn't afraid or anything. And they just watched me and then they walked off.
Huh.
Years later, I assume because Leadville is an old mining town, and we actually lived right behind an old mine. And I theorized that it was a couple miners
Right.
that probably been killed. But I also had a UFO encounter, a possible alien abduction at
Huh.
the same time. And so my interest was always very much into, even saw Bigfoot as a young child up there.
Oh, wow.
So all of these things played into me and it kind of set the stage. And
Right.
of course, like I said, I wanted to be a park ranger and I followed my dreams. So everywhere I went, I was able to start up a chapter, and each chapter specializes in that particular area.
Right.
And so you would get probably like in Texas a haunting or a UFO case that would be completely different than say what you would get in New York
Mm-hmm.
or in Florida. But we all follow
Hmm.
the same platform. I've spent many years developing the doctrine for Anubis Paranormal Research Organization. We have a manual that I kid you not is about the size of a phone book.
Oh, wow.
And it's one of those things when I learned as a ranger, you put in these manuals. If you have a question, refer to the manual and it'll be there. And so that's what I did as I took a lot of my training aspects and incorporated it into my paranormal
Right.
research. And in fact, being a ranger, I soon became what they called Ranger Molder
Oh,
on
right.
X-Files. Because anytime something was happening in one of the historical parks or any of the areas, they would call me because they knew I was into the paranormal.
Right.
And after that, I started going to different national parks that were having incidents that they could not explain. And so I'd be sent out to like Glacier National Park, back to Yosemite, all the way over on their dime in order to investigate these things,
Oh,
because I
wow.
was the go-to person.
Right.
And in fact, I'm sure you've heard the stories about Dave Politis and the 411, the missing 411.
I believe so. Yeah.
Well, one of the things he always talked about was he had spoken to a couple rangers about what was going on. I was one of those rangers.
Huh.
And the Park Service wants to keep everything very quiet.
Right.
They don't want it to interfere with basically the tourism.
Right.
And of course, the biggest reason, the revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of it is kept secret. But as I get older, I think people need to know a lot about this stuff because it
Right.
is dangerous in those parks.
Right.
And things do happen. And we need to be very cautious
Mm-hmm.
when we go to them. So it's been a kind of a combination two-way street with me.
Right. And as being as large as this organization is, that's put, that's a lot of time and effort put into this thing, and you're one of those, teams and organizations that really take this seriously, and I think that's just amazing. Instead of just okay, I'm going to start a team and we'll do this here and there, but like you spend a big portion of your time doing this stuff, and I think that's amazing. Um,
Mhm.
so Anson, I'm going to jump to you for a minute. So how did you kind of get into the paranormal?
So I was always very much a skeptic in the paranormal. Up until my wife and I met, who's a very firm believer in the paranormal. I would always try to logic everything away,
Right.
especially with jobs that I was doing at that time. I worked in a lot of different areas, a lot of history within the area that I was working in. And it just got to the point where I couldn't logic everything away.
Right.
There are things that have happened and things that I've got to witness that you can't just logic it away. You can't make an excuse for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. My wife and I started to investigate on our own. It was just her and I that were investigating, and just kind of on a whim, we found Anubis, who was starting up a chapter here in Grand Junction.
Mm-hmm.
So I applied for it. That's how I met Chris and the team that we had at that time, and started doing investigations with them. And that's how I kind of honed my foundation as an investigator. So I started out as an investigator, and then started out, went from that to a tech guy, did all the tech stuff for us. And then Chris, hearing some of my background, because I had several years ago, prior to all this happening, I had a demonic infestation inside of a home I was living in.
Mm.
And took a very long time to get rid of this particular entity, but this entity was hell-bent on messing with me.
Right.
So it took a long time to get away with that, or to get out of that. Chris knew that I had some specialty, at least understanding the demonic. And so I started training as a demonologist. And that has been, aside from the director position that I held, and now the assistant executive director, that's my primary role with the teams, is a consultant and demonologist for Anubis.
Right. Now speaking of demonology, like how much actually goes into becoming a demonologist?
The very first thing that I would ever ask anybody is, why would you want to do it in the first place?
Right.
Because it's ultimately, I mean, your heart has to kind of be in the right place. I do it because I do believe in, I mean, growing up in a religious home, you might not have always believed in ghosts, but
Mhm.
there was always the fight between good and evil.
Right.
And so Satan is real, demons are real, and it's something I've always believed in. And it's something that there's not a whole lot of places to turn when stuff like that happens.
Mhm.
When you start having supernatural encounters that are malicious or inhuman in a home, there's not a whole lot of places to turn.
Right.
And so that's what really drew me to it. And a lot of the training is, there's a whole gamut of training. I mean, you're looking at theology, religion, you're looking at the darker side of stuff, as far as demonology is concerned, looking at demon lore, even stuff as far as black magic, witchcraft, the occult,
Mm-hmm.
because all of it plays a role into certain cases. Being
Right.
able to identify, specific altars, being able to identify specific ritual sites, and being able to kind of nitpick and be able to kind of play detective for a little bit and figure out what's causing this, because a demonic haunting is a lot different than a human spirit.
Right.
It has to be invited into that area, and they don't haunt homes. They don't only haunt people.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to kind of find the end. You have to kind of play detective a little bit and figure out where is this coming from? Why is this happening to this person? And so there's a lot of different hats you have to play in order to understand the full depth of demonology.
Right. Now, how often do you guys do cases where that's like the strictly that's the haunting? It's a demon haunting. How often do you guys come across cases like that?
I would say probably the last one we did was Melrose.
Yeah.
I would say that was probably the last one we did. The good thing about demonic haunts is it's very rare.
Right.
Demons have become so mainstream on paranormal television, on YouTube. Everything's a demon. Everything's a malicious,
Yeah.
inhuman spirit. Everything is Satan at work. in reality, it's incredibly rare for it to happen. So the cases that you actually come across that are an actual diabolical haunting are very slim. But there's always that chance that it can happen, and that's primarily what I deal with is consulting with our teams that are going into investigations, hearing claims from the investigation, and looking for those finer details that could maybe say, okay, we're dealing with a human spirit at this time versus now we're dealing with an inhuman spirit.
Right.
And looking for those small details in the stories. Because most demons play by this, they have their MO. They have their own method of operation that they deal with, and it's pretty easy to figure out what's what as far as a demonic haunting or instead of a human haunt. And so that's primarily what we do as far as what I do as far as consulting goes. But I'd say probably the last case we did was probably Hotel Melrose here in Grand Junction.
Okay, and see, and that's one thing that a lot of these paranormal shows, what's the word I'm looking for? Like I said, that's what they portray a lot, and a lot of people believe these shows so much they think everything is a demon.
Yes.
And that's one thing that annoys me about a lot of these shows is they portray that, and I know some of the stuff they do in these shows is legit and some of it's real, but I know the biggest portion of it is just entertainment, and so it's like you just can't believe everything these shows tell you, and people that don't understand this field, that's one thing I try to tell people that's like ask me questions about this stuff. I was like, don't believe the TV shows.
No,
Right.
I was like, because 6% of it is bullshit. So
well, and you can have human hauntings, you know, because I'm a very much a firm believer that if you have a human spirit in your home that wasn't really that great of a person in life, they're not going to change that in death. They're not going to be that great of a person as a spirit. So you can have signs of what may seem to be an inhuman haunting. That's just not a very good human spirit. I mean, you can get scratches, you can get bite marks, you can have entities that are trying to, you know, cause fear in your home.
Right.
But there's different intricacies between a human spirit and an inhuman spirit. There's different things that they follow, and there's different telltale signs of an inhuman spirit versus a human spirit. And once you research it and once you have the knowledge of it, you start picking apart those details. And so, like watching a lot of these shows, you can see there's sometimes that they have supposed evidence that they don't catch on that could legitimately say that it is an inhuman spirit that they're dealing with. But then there's other stuff that they pick up on. Well, this is demonic, when in fact it's not. There's nothing there that you're giving me that's saying that this is an inhuman spirit.
Right. So with all these different chapters and stuff, like how do you guys decide like what cases to take? Do you do strictly residentials, or do you have, you know, a lot of businesses reach out, or do you, you know, sometimes just say, okay, well, I want to go check out the Stanley Hotel, so let's go check this out. So how do you pick and choose like where you investigate and take your cases from?
Well, the big thing was, now APRO is now 27 years, 28 years old. And primarily the way we established it is, again, I threw back into my park ranger days.
Right.
You do an investigation. You do a forensic basic investigation. And we will get a call, whether it be from a residence, a business, or something else. It can be either a report of a haunting, a UFO sighting, alien contact, or cryptid. And two of our team members go out, usually our leads, and they will sit down with the client. And primarily we have an interview questionnaire.
Right.
And it's basically more or less a psychological. It'll ask questions like, did anybody else see this phenomenon? When was the last time you had a drink? Do you drink alcohol? Do you use drugs? Things like that, so that we can get a baseline of how realistic the account is.
Right.
After that, then we'll do a preliminary investigation. And if there is a warrant for activity, then we'll send the teams in. And the team will spend anywhere from a couple days, a week, to even up to a month if need be. Because one of the key factors is to these people, whether it is something that we can debunk, to them, they're having a traumatic experience.
Right.
And we have to treat that with respect. And so we do. I mean, we don't drive up with markings on our cars like you see in the TV shows.
Right.
And because there again, it's going to draw attention from their neighbors,
Mhm.
which is going to cause more stress and so forth. So we keep it pretty low.
Yep.
Right.
Low key. And we have them fill out forms, waivers, and so forth. And we get a lot of different types. You get the types where, for instance, we had one time a claim that they heard scratching behind their bed at night, and they heard footsteps up in the attic, and they were very much scared of what was happening. Well, we went in, we investigated. Well, we found out that through looking at the bedroom where this all was happening, that there was mouse droppings behind the bed. We went up to the attic. Part of the screen was ripped open, and there was fur on it. Turns out it was a raccoon.
Mm.
And they were relieved, but at the same time, they were kind of like, well, aren't we good enough to have a haunted house? And you got to explain those things.
Right.
And then it'll go the other way. You'll show up with a crew, and they'll look behind you after they open the door and ask, where are the cameras?
Right.
Well, our tech people have the cameras. And they'll look again and they'll say, no, TV cameras. I says, we don't have any TV cameras. And I've had the door slammed in my face.
Oh, man.
And so you get a variety of different types of interactions. But it's everybody's looking for a book deal. Everybody's looking for a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been offered TV shows. And the one thing that I've always said is, will we be able to accurately report what we encounter, what we see, and any evidence that we have?
Right.
And you kind of get this, well, it is. We got to make sure that the sponsors are happy and that we've got the ratings and so on. So
yeah,
there's a lot of fakery. And unfortunately, we're seeing that now starting to rise its ugly head.
Yeah.
The truth is coming out. But it's the sincerest, the real, true investigators are the ones that aren't seeking fame and fortune. They're doing it for the right reason, trying to help not only the living, but the dead.
Right.
And like I said, we will stick it out until we come up with some kind of an answer for the client. And if it is something that is really nasty, we will gain the evidence and then we'll supply it to a church.
Right.
And we have different denominations on file. So basically what it is if, say, for instance, you have a Native American family who's having issues, you call in a shaman. You call in one of the Native American priests to come in and deal with it. If you've got a Jewish person, you call in a rabbi. So it's based upon their faith.
Right.
Because it's their strength that drives these negative forces out.
Right.
And then there's a lot of these people that, say, for instance, you've got a sweet, loving little grandma spirit, and they're welcome to stay. The family welcomes them as part of the family. But again, it's those type of things. And all they're asking for, the clients, is answers.
Right.
And that's what our job is, to find
and that's something
the answers.
that you hit on right there is, there's a big teaching, because one of the things that Afro does is, one thing that we're really big in is to inform and educate. We've helped train other paranormal teams. We've helped train investigators that go off and do their own thing, or stay with us as an investigator or a camera person or a tech person. But the big thing is to educate. And that's one thing that we do attempt on some circumstances is that you do have an entity in your home, but you can learn to cohabitate with the spirit in your home.
Mm-hmm.
And you can learn to have this guest in your house and cohabitate with this spirit peacefully without it being scary.
Right.
And it's taking that fear and that the needing of answers and turning it into, this is what it is. Now, where do we want to go from here?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that Anubis is very big into is education, is educating the general public, educating investigators. As far as like your question goes with the teams, all of our teams, Chris uses the analogy of a wagon wheel. Mm-hmm. So all of our teams, Chris and I don't keep our thumbs on all the teams and tell them exactly how to run things. Our teams, once they establish in an area, they set up their team, they set up how they want to do it, how they want to get their funding, how they want to do their investigations. As long as that core hub, the core values of the Anubis Paranormal Research Organization is there, they can do how they want to do it, as long as that core foundation stays the same. And that's what makes them a part of APRO. That's what keeps them under that blanket, right, is following that core belief system, and which is heavily taught to the directors and to the leaders of each team, so they know exactly what we're looking for as far as how we want things ran.
Right.
And then up to them, it's up to them on what cases they want to take. It's up to them on what they want to specialize in. Right. Because we don't just do hauntings. Like Chris had mentioned, we do UFOs, we do extraterrestrials, we do cryptids, we, anything that falls within the scope of the paranormal, we have knowledge in. And then we have specialists like myself and other people that deal with cryptids and UFOs that specialize in a specific area of the paranormal.
Right.
So that's how they pretty much are able to handle what they want, because, Chris and I living in Colorado, we can't tell, we couldn't tell our team in Scotland how to do their investigations, because their investigations are very different than what we do here.
Right.
What they're going to run into is very different than what we'll run into here. So they pretty much have free reign to do how they want to do it, as long as those core fundamentals, those core values of the organization stay the same.
Right. Now, you keep mentioning like UFOs and cryptids and stuff like that. So how often do you guys come across a UFO case, or say a Bigfoot case? Like, how often does that come about?
In Mesa County?
In Mesa County, there have been quite a few reports of Bigfoots, even UFO sightings here. But each state has a certain number. Now, like down in Florida, they had quite a few UFO cases that they investigate, alleged alien interactions. Now in Nebraska, it's not so much. A lot of it is dealing with a little bit more of the cryptids and the hauntings than the UFOs. California, definitely more hauntings. The Southern California area. And then if you go farther north, then you get into a whole different group, which are more cryptids and so on. So it basically is geared towards the logistics of the location.
Right.
And, we get reports of all sorts of different things all the time.
Right.
And of course, we also interact with other groups so that we can exchange information. And we have no problem working with another group and sharing our findings, and they in turn will send us some of their data for us to go over and get a determination on. And I think that is very healthy. A lot of people talk about para-unity. Well, that's what para-unity is. It's not, well, this is mine and I'm not going to share it because I don't want you to steal it and take credit for it.
Right.
That's not how this is supposed to work. And that's why you're starting to see a lot of these conflicts going on, not only on TV, but even on the regular circuit.
Right.
And there's a lot of groups that are finally saying, I've had enough. And unfortunately, they're leaving because they don't like the bickering. They don't like the bullying that's been taking place. And so we've got a thicker hide. I've been called a lot of things, and so is APRO. And I just say, oh, well, that's your opinion.
Right.
I'm not going to engage in a mishmash of logistics to try to prove what we have. You can take it or you can leave it. It's open that's on the open forum. And it's, there's sometimes I have to bite my lower lip, but we want to be bigger than that. We want to be better
Right.
than that.
Right.
And we wouldn't have gotten where we are today if we hadn't.
Right. And see, and you're right. There are a lot of teams out there that are more or less all about them, and that's it's just so unfortunate because it's not just about them as a whole. It's about everybody that's into this stuff, and we've gotten lucky. My team and I, we haven't come across any of those groups yet. Like everybody I've interacted with is willing to share, or give this piece of advice, or say, hey, check out this piece of equipment. And so we've gotten really lucky on that so far. But now, you keep mentioning cryptids. I'm sure people listening to this show, I'm sure they've heard of Bigfoot and they know what UFOs are. But to those that may not know, what exactly is a cryptid?
Want to answer that one, or?
So basically, how we define cryptids is a cryptid is a creature that isn't known biologically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at something like Bigfoot. Bigfoot isn't a discovered biological animal. He's not or the Wendigo or the Chupacabra, Loch Ness Monster, any of those types. There's a lot of myth behind them. There are a lot of mythical animals. Could be considered elementals. Certain of them could be considered elementals, but it's basically it's an unknown creature of sorts. We deal. I was going to say, I think you can't even think of the last time we even dealt with one here, but we, like you said, we have a lot of teams that specialize in cryptid sightings, depending on their location. Our team in Scotland, Mike, our director out there, is he's not very far from Loch Ness, very far at all.
Right.
But the cryptids range from a vast majority, there's a vast amount of what cryptids can be. I mean, certain cryptids could be considered elemental spirits, like the Wendigo, being that it's an earth spirit. It's a spirit that kind of predates existence. To Bigfoot, who very well could be a undiscovered or a undocumented ape. But that's kind of where we fall into it, is where cryptids are concerned, is that trying to distort the myth from actual what's happening or the actual creature itself. Right.
And see, until I actually really got into actually starting my team, like I'd never heard that word before. When somebody first met,
it's kind of a new craze, cryptozoology, cryptids. Right. It's kind of a new craze.
Like I still don't know a lot about it. Like when I hear the term, I'm like, okay, I know what you're talking about. But like I've never really dove into that part of the field. I know one of my really good friends, he was like, you should do episodes on this and that. And I was like, well, man, I don't really know about that stuff. Yeah. I was like, I'm more into the ghost side of the paranormal than a Bigfoot or stuff. So I was like, I don't know a lot about that. So I would be completely lost if I'm doing an interview and I'm like, I have no clue what you're talking about right now. So, so I mean, I've looked into some people that's what they specialize in, and I've thought about getting some people on that does specialize in Bigfoot or Loch Ness and stuff like that, just to kind of, bring a little variety to it. So now, do you guys, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and that's something that I feel like any team should branch out. I mean, there's a lot of paranormal teams out there. There's a lot of ghost hunters, and there's a lot of cryptid hunters out there. There's a lot of UFO hunters. But having those resources available to where you can, because I mean, we just, like Chris talked about with the churches, we have a lot of churches on file that can help us with diabolical huntings. It's the same thing with cryptids and the same thing with UFOs and everything else. Is we have a lot of consultants that we can use that specialize in those particular fields. Because I mean, if you can spend your whole lifetime studying cryptozoology, UFOs, extraterrestrials, hauntings, and still probably have more questions than answers at the end of the day. But having people, that's what they dedicate their life to, or dedicate their time to, is that specific field. You're going to get much better results by having those people than all of
Right.
us are kind of a jack of all trades. All of us know a little bit of something about everything, but we do have those particular people that specialize in one particular area,
Right.
and that's what they're good at.
Right. I mean, I do have a couple connections that I've got over the last couple of years. I have one who he's a paranormal investigator, but he's also really intrigued by Bigfoot and stuff. So,
Mhm.
so he knows like a lot about Bigfoot and stuff. And so I mean, I have a couple of people, but it's just it's something I'm thinking about diving into, at least for the show anyway.
Yeah.
As far as like personal research, I very rarely have time to do research on
Yep.
what I want to do. So it's like,
Yep.
oh man, because so now I don't forget where I was going with this. All right, we'll dive into this. So what's like some of the equipment you guys like to bring and you guys actually use, whether it's a paranormal investigation or like what equipment would you bring if you're doing you have a Bigfoot case? Like what's some of like the different equipment for all these different cases you guys take on?
Well, for instance, with a Bigfoot case, our investigator would, of course, go out, do the preliminary, get a report. They do quite a bit of photography of the general area, the weather conditions during the time. Then, if they find evidence, they would be carrying uh, plaster of Paris to make molds of the feet that they
Okay.
encounter. Again, photographing, measuring. They take a T measure in order to get a good diameter of what's going on.
Hmm.
If they find any hair, they would take tweezers to that hair, not touch it, put it into a little baggie, seal it up, and then it would be taken in to a DNA processing person at one of the colleges or universities and have a DNA strand run on it in order to determine if it is an animal, known animal, or something else. Now,
Right.
it's not going to pop up that it's going to be Bigfoot. It's going to come up as unknown.
Right.
That's the first process. And a lot of times that happens. A lot of times you'll see shelters that are presumed to be these basic areas where a Bigfoot has been staying. So again, you forensically take a look at it, try to get as much data as you can, and go from there. You look for food sources. What if there's any berries, or even if there's any bones nearby, or any kind of refuse, and you would take into consideration that. So that would be a typical investigation for a Bigfoot.
Well, and that's even something that we've talked to recently with other Bigfoot hunters is now there's kind of a shift in equipment with them as well, where they're taking EMF meters and Geiger counters with them because there's a huge amount of evidence that supports Bigfoot sightings directly having a impact on EMF fields and even radiation levels.
Huh.
So there's a lot of Bigfoot investigations that they're using similar equipment that you would use in a paranormal investigation or a ghost hunt. And obviously with UFOs, you would have your equipment that you can look up at night. You'd have your, there's people that take night vision. There's people that take binoculars, spotting scopes. Even Geiger counters are one of those things that they can do with that because there's been a huge amount of evidence that supports that UFO landings or UFO encounters, there's a tremendous amount of residual radiation left over. So it's very much tailored to the specific investigation, like you said. But everybody kind of has their own niche on what they're going to take. Like Chris said, we treat it very much, if we're going to go on a cryptid investigation or extraterrestrial investigation, it's very much a forensic crime scene at that point in time.
Right.
So you're looking at the small details. You're not thinking, okay, I need an SLS camera and this and that on a Bigfoot hunt. You're looking at, I need evidence gathering materials. I need plaster Paris. I need to, get a rundown on what's going on environmentally around the area. Because that's ultimately you're going to be your best evidence right there. And that's ultimately going to be your best tools is to figure out what's going on and what's going on around that area.
Huh. That's definitely interesting. Like the Bigfoot thing, like all that makes sense. Like some of the stuff, like you mentioned, the that you could use for both paranormal and Bigfoot. Like I never would have thought of that you could do that. That's interesting.
Well, many years ago, I put together the theory, and now it seems to be getting around quite a bit, that these entities that we call Bigfoot may not even be from this dimension.
Yeah.
That they may be interdimensional. And that's why 1 second they're there and 1 second they're not. And for a creature that large, it would be very, very difficult to keep it hidden.
Well, that theory does hold a lot of weight too, because I mean, you look at like tracks, Bigfoot tracks. Yeah. You can catch them for a certain distance, and then they just stop. They're gone. And that's been a telltale sign of Bigfoot encounters for a long time, is finding tracks, but only finding a couple tracks or 4 tracks, 8 tracks. But then they're in the same terrain. It's not they're going from mud to rock, or they're in the same area, but all of a sudden their tracks just stop. They're gone. And so there's been a huge theory that's actually caught a lot of steam as of recently, that Bigfoot is interdimensional.
And the same goes for the Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah.
They believe it might be from a different dimensional plane, where it could be even a wormhole from the past into the present. And that the descriptions, of course, of Nessie are that of a plesiosaur. And that has been extinct for quite a while.
Right.
So again, you have to look at all the research. And that is why I took the training that I had as a park ranger in forensic science and incorporated it into our organization, because you've got to have something scientific to fall back on.
Right.
There's always going to be the stories. There's always going to be the legends and so on. But my terminology is, would it pass in court?
Right.
And if it does, then we're on the right track. But no matter what we do, there's always going to be the doubter. There's always going to be the challenger. And that's fine. We need that.
Right.
But at the same point, there is so much evidence out there that realistically it should pass a court hearing. And we do more scientifically in the field of paranormal research than any other science out there.
It makes a lot of sense. So, all right. So to each one of you guys, whether it's a Bigfoot investigation you've been on, or a paranormal, what's been to each one of you guys probably the thing that's probably, I would maybe spooked you the most, or just left you scratching your head like, I don't know what the hell just happened. So like what's like your biggest one for each of you guys?
Hotel Melrose.
Yes, I think for both of us. And the reason for that is we got into something that we weren't prepared for. And for me personally, we do believe there was a demonic element at the Melrose. In fact, we've even got photographic evidence. And the hotel itself was built in 1904 and has had several murders, a lot of natural deaths, a lot of suicides, and so forth. But we were attempting to move on the spirits that were there. As soon as we decided to do that, we started having problems amongst our team, bickering, fighting, and so on. Then all of a sudden, I was literally attacked physically. I had developed an infection in my foot, which required the amputation of my big toe. And from that, I developed sepsis, nearly died. I then got through that. Within a week of being discharged from the hospital, I was back in the hospital again. They discovered that I had sepsis again. Actually, they claimed I did die, but I was brought back. I then got home from that, and I fell, and I cracked my skull and started to bleed out, which I should have died from that. And then I developed another severe infection and have had to have surgery 8 times over the course of it, 2 years in May. And it took a lot out of me, but I kept fighting it, and I'm sitting here today. But I wasn't the only one. Anson and his family had issues.
Yeah, so when we were actually we did a very long-term investigation of the Melrose. It was actually at one point in time the office, so to speak, of the APRO West Division. So we were there all the time. We were there pretty much every day, if not multiple times a day, doing investigations, working out of the building. My wife, who is very much an empath, regardless if she likes to believe it or not, she can pick up on feelings. She can pick up on spirits. Most of the time, it's not necessarily like a clairvoyant or a psychic medium or a physical medium can feel. It's emotion. It's feeling. It's not necessarily seeing the spirit. She started, I think it was the very first night that she went there, she started having awful, vivid dreams of the Melrose and our children. Shortly after that, I think once we concluded the investigation there, I think it was in December of that year, we were living in an apartment, never had any maintenance issues with the apartment, never really had any major issues. We all came under, my kids started getting real sick for no apparent reason. Were lethargic, couldn't explain what was going on. Come to find out, we had almost 900 parts per million of carbon monoxide leaking into our home. That if wouldn't have been detected, it would have wiped the entire family out. Which, like, this is coming from a apartment complex that was fairly new. These aren't ran down apartment buildings. They look good. They're maintained, but it's something that came out of absolutely nowhere. Like Chris said, we do have photographic evidence of the entities at the Melrose Hotel, but that was probably the one that stands out the most to me.
Yeah.
And even just evidence that we've collected there.
Yeah.
The basement of the Melrose. Chris actually hit me with it, and I kind of felt kind of stupid for not noticing it after you said it, or until you said it. But this is a building, like Chris said, was built in 1900s. The basement's regular concrete basement that they kept storage, they kept different things down there, odds and ends stuff. But the one thing that we noticed down there is that it honestly looked like somebody went down there and cleaned and dusted that place every single day. It wasn't the normal dirty, grungy, cobweb-filled basements that you normally see. It looked like somebody that literally went in there and cleaned it every single day. Yeah. Which, I was very new when I had joined APRO at this time, wasn't in the demonology field, hadn't dealt with much other than my own experience with the demonic entity. But it shows that something was concentrated in that area, that even insects weren't coming into this area. Even the bug life and the natural rodents and the things that you get in an old building like that weren't coming into the building. There was something that was keeping them away from it.
Right. So we had actually even started calling it the Stanley Hotel of the West, because it really had some of the same kind of characteristics, except for the demonic end of it. And there had been devil worship located in there, heavy drug use. So the history of it was not a good one. And like I said, a couple murders. One was the owner, the wife's owner, where he had killed her and decapitated her. They found her skull in the desert outside of Grand Junction, and they never did find her body. But the photograph that we have of her with the demon standing above her is Sabrina. And we compare pictures of her while she was living and the picture that we took in the basement, and it's a dead ringer.
It is.
And then there was a little boy who was drowned in the bathtub by his father, who was a trucker, and he did not want to be bothered by his son while he was out on the road. And so there had been people who had come there to literally die there at the hotel. Just to be there. So, this place was rampant with activity. and but it was the demonic force that didn't want us there, and it definitely didn't want me because I was the leader,
Right.
and it really did try to do me in, but it had done it in spurts. One thing didn't work, we'd move into something else, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And the hospital was calling me the miracle man, the cat man, because I had 9 lives, and they even said you should not be here. My medical records are over 2,492 pages long.
Holy crap, man.
Yeah. So
That's
but something positive was also looking out for me, and I'm very appreciative of that.
right.
So,
That's insane to go through that. And to me be sitting here talking to you, that's just, like I said, it is a miracle, and you're props to you, man, because you seem to be like one tough dude to live through all that stuff. So,
Well, and the thing after all of that, APRO really didn't lose any steam.
right.
We've developed 4 chapters since then.
Yeah.
4 new chapters since then. The West Division is still going. The East Division has gotten off to a good start because we've split Colorado into 2 different sections. So we have the Denver Division, the Eastern Colorado Division, and we have the Western Colorado Division. And all of them are doing well. Like I said, we've opened up 4 chapters since then. How we've seen a lot of growth. So there was a lot of positive that did come out of it too.
all
Right.
right.
And that's one thing, is that APRO is very much a family. We look out for each other, and we make sure that everybody's taken care of, and we're always there. Anybody from Scotland to Japan to New York to Nebraska can call Chris or I anytime, and we're available to them.
Right.
And that's one thing that we've always tried to really instill, is that camaraderie amongst the teams, that everybody can work on each other. So there's a lot of positive that came out of it too.
Right.
And there's a lot of fail safes. So like when I was out of the picture for so long, Anson kind of took the lead here, and all the other directors knew exactly what was happening. So they stepped up and made sure things ran smoothly.
Right.
And that's dedication to me. Those are people that are really doing it for all the right reasons.
Absolutely. Now you've got all these different chapters. So how many active members would you say you guys have?
Oh man.
I would say between all of the groups, at least 120.
Oh wow. Now how does one become a member?
Well, you want us to answer that one?
Well, so the big thing is depending upon where you live, everybody has their own different ways of doing it. If you're in Colorado, the first thing to do is to reach out to either Chris, myself, or my wife, who's the director for Colorado. We have an interview process that we do. We have an application process. One thing that every paranormal team knows is that the paranormal draws all different walks of life. It draws the skeptics, it draws the believers, but then it also draws in people that aren't getting into it for the right reasons.
Right.
So our checks and balances system, as far as our interview process, our application process, is to weed out the people that are trying to get in it for the wrong reasons.
Right.
Because like I said, we do have those core values that we work on, but it is an application process, and it's fairly extensive on what we look for.
Right.
With Colorado, one thing that I implemented when I was the director of Colorado was an investigator is a promotion. So we would hire people based on experience as a cameraman or a tech person or a historian or a treasurer or something other than being an investigator, because we can hire 50 investigators in a day.
Right.
But it's finding those specialty skills and then having them move into a position of an investigator.
Right.
Having them work behind the scenes and seeing where their drive is, where their niche is in the team, and seeing where the commitment level is.
Right.
And seeing where that commitment level is, and then having, being that promotion as being the investigator, getting being the one that's getting to run the investigations, getting to be a team lead, and moving away from their other positions. So that's one thing that we implemented in Colorado is that, you know, we don't just hire investigators. We hire people that have skills in other areas, and then the investigator is a step up from what they're doing.
Right.
So, but it's a fairly extensive process on what we do. There's a lot of questions. We run people through a lot of questions, but we're open to pretty much anybody that wants to come and try. The big thing that we look at is we're not looking for thrill seekers. We're not looking for people that want to do it as a hobby. We're looking for people who want to do it to, like Chris says, to help the living and the dead.
Right.
We want people that want to make a commitment to it. They want to do it the correct way. They want to do it the safe way, and they want to make sure that we're doing it the most scientific, the way that we can collect the most data.
Right.
You know, that was one thing we talked about earlier with equipment. One thing that APRO is, we have strict rules on what equipment's allowed and what isn't. You'll never see a YouTube video with APRO using a Ouija board.
Right.
You'll never see them use that. You might see pendulums, maybe, depending on the circumstance. You might see dowsing rods somewhere, but most of the time we're using equipment that we can actually collect data on. Right. We're not using something that has a lot of false negatives. So we're looking for people that want to take a scientific approach to the paranormal and not looking for the movie deals or the book deals or as a thrill seeking.
Right. Now does a person have to live in that state? Say somebody lives in Arizona, close to Southern California. Would you be willing to let them join the team if like they're willing to travel in that general area?
So it kind of depends on the situation, but yeah, we would, if they're willing to travel and they're willing to still be a good functioning member of the team and be able to accept those travel constraints. Absolutely.
All right. That's pretty cool of you guys.
We're even open to anybody who wants to start up a chapter.
Yeah.
Okay.
If they're willing to take on the directorship and putting it together, we supply all the materials.
Okay.
And, just like we were saying, as long as they go by the core philosophy,
right,
then we'd be more than happy to start that. And we are.
Right.
Very ambitious, I hate to say, because we want to be, no offense, but we want to be the best teams out there.
Right. Yeah.
Like my dad used to say, shoot for the moon and hope you hit the lamppost.
Right.
And but that's our goal. And again, it helps us. Now we're also looking at dividing California up because it's a large state, even Texas. One group, it's hard for them to be in a certain area. And so again, we find the right people will be willing to do it.
Well, and the other thing that we've looked at, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there. The one thing that we've looked at too is teams that are already established teams falling under that blanket of APRO that meet the criteria that we're looking for, that follow kind of the same principles that we have. They're still known by a different name, but they fall under that umbrella of APRO.
That was fixed to be a question. So, so yeah, you would allow a team to be a part of your team, but like keep their same name. So
yeah, and as long as they still believe in the same core beliefs as what we do, and they're not doing anything that kind of goes way in left field of the scope of how we do things, absolutely.
Right. All right. So if somebody wants to join or just kind of follow along with you guys, how can people get a hold of you guys and like just kind of follow along with you?
Well, we are on Facebook. And with Facebook, we have each of our chapters under group pages. So our primary page is, all they'd have to do is just search up Anubis Paranormal and pull up all of our pages. But say, for instance, somebody lives on the East Coast that's interested in either our Florida or New York chapter, they can look up that specific chapter. Or if they want to know the whole gambit, they can look up under the primary page. We also have a web page, which is at www.anubisparanormal. What is it?
Wix sites.
Oh yeah, Wix site. anubisparanormal.wixsite.com/APRO. Our Gmails Our primary Gmail is Anubis Paranormal Research Org at gmail.com. But our chapters also have individual Gmails as well. But
Right.
they can be, if anybody wants to contact us through the primary, I can forward it to the other chapters.
Right.
We also have our own podcast. We also have a YouTube channel.
Oh, right.
So
Actually, 2 YouTube channels.
yeah, we have 2 YouTube channels. We just started up a pilot program called Afro Kids. So
wow.
it's a YouTube channel that it is kids that are interested in the paranormal. A lot of them have grown up with the paranormal. A lot of them are my kids that have grown up living with paranormal investigators. So this is something that's not out of the realm for them. They understand the paranormal. They've been on investigations before. But you'll see them go on investigations that they're leading. They go over video footage, YouTube videos, things like that, and basically get a kid's input on if it's fake, if it's real, why is it real, why is it fake, and they're a child's input on the paranormal. And that's basically that was kind of a brainchild of Chris's in order to kind of get children to the understanding that the paranormal isn't scary. It's turning that fear into curiosity, and to pursue the paranormal. Don't be afraid of it. Don't shy away from it, but pursue it and embrace the paranormal.
Right.
And so that's actually been a really, really good program for us. There's been a huge amount of success with that. And then Chris and I have Ghost Watch, which is our podcast that we do. And we're on all major streaming services. We're on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio. We're on all the major all major platforms.
All right. And what's your main YouTube channel?
So our main YouTube channel is Anubis Paranormal Research Organization.
All right. And just a second ago, because I'm about to wrap this up, but you mentioned you want to kind of teach kids of this, the paranormal isn't scary, and when you look at it from like the aspect that you guys do and like my team does, it's not scary, but there's got to be times you do get spooked. Am I right? Oh, yeah. So, and it's people have asked me that before. Do you ever get scared? I'm like, well, yeah, it's not that I don't get scared. It's just it's hard not to get scared if you see something happen that just you're not expecting. So and like when my team goes out, I'm always the one that gets scared by the stuff that isn't paranormal, and so that's been kind of a long-going thing with me and my team. I'll catch my reflection in the mirror when I'm walking by, and it'll cause me to jump and scream, and I'm like, "Holy shit! I was not expecting that." So, but there are things that are you can't explain that there's no way it's not going to at least spook you a little bit.
You're dealing with something. You're dealing with a phenomena that shouldn't happen. If you see a glass or something slide across a table, that shouldn't happen. There's no physical reason as to why that should happen.
Right.
If you catch a voice, if you're doing an EVP session and you catch a voice on recording that's not a person that was with you, that's something that shouldn't happen.
Right.
But at the same time, like we've taught, like I've taught my kids, is that human spirits have a very limited amount of ways that they can communicate with the living. And sometimes their way of communicating with the living is going to be scary to us because it's a very limited means of being able to do so. Right. And so you have to learn to accept that you're going to experience things that are that shouldn't be able to happen, or that kind of it's kind of that brain melting moment where this shouldn't happen, but it just did. I just saw it. I just experienced it, but that shouldn't happen.
Right.
But at the same time, you have to look at it as curiosity, not fear.
Right.
And look at it for what it is, and not look at it for, like we talked about at the very beginning of the show, it's a devil, it's a demon. It's not, it's most of the time very far from that. It's something trying to communicate with you because they want to be heard.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I really appreciate you guys coming on, and this has been a really fun and interesting interview. So anybody that wants to join up with these guys, or just follow along with them, check out their website, their Facebook, all their different chapters, and just check these guys out. They're one of these good teams that are doing it for the right
That
reason.
wasn't a ghost. That was a child.
So yeah, everybody check out Anubis Paranormal Research Organization. They have all kinds of different chapters, and now I've learned they have a podcast and everything. So I may have to wink, wink, nudge, nudge, get on their podcast here soon. So
Absolutely. Yep.
So Chris, Anson, thank you guys for joining Life Beyond 6 Feet, and we'll chat with everybody next time.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Thank you.